Hello and welcome to this installment of Conversations with Andres Ilves. With me today is Tal-Or Cohen Montemayor, CEO and founder of CyberWell. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you started off as a lawyer in your career, but you're not practicing full-time now. What happened?
I was working as a lawyer for a couple of years and felt like I wasn't making too much of an impact. And then the Pittsburgh shooting, the Tree of Life synagogue shooting happened in 2018. And it was a moment that really gave me pause as an American and a Jew and somebody who was also living here in Israel to kind of look at my background and my skill set and ask myself if there's something else that I could be doing to make a positive impact, especially in light of such a horrific attack. I really, now looking back at it, I think that the Tree of Life synagogue shooting was actually a very big turning point. That was kind of the beginning of the reveal of just how bad anti-Semitism had gotten in the United States. And in any case, when I was looking at this issue and what I could do, I found myself complaining to a friend that I didn't feel like I was making a big enough impact as a lawyer. And he actually brought me in to be able to work in the open source intelligence and business intelligence space. And at the time, even though I wasn't from the field originally, I didn't serve in the intelligence forces and the IDF, I came in and was looking at a lot of opportunities that were looking increasingly at this issue of anti-Semitism because I started working in the field after the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. So I ended up carving out a specific expertise in online anti-Semitism, specifically in kind of the darker corners of the internet, chat platforms, and I really saw a very clear migration of deeply anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and memes and content coming from the darker channels to the mainstream everyday social media platforms. And as a lawyer, I looked at this phenomenon and thought to myself, what is the difference between a dark channel and a mainstream social media platform? And one of the answers is that the mainstream platforms actually have a rule book, right? They're governed by self-regulating digital policies known as trust and safety. So when I looked at this phenomenon, I thought, what if we created a solution that was really rooted in compliance with the rules of the platforms themselves and empowered by technology? And that's how I thought of CyberWell.
So before we go further, can you talk us through anti-Semitism and how would you define anti-Semitism, and has that definition evolved?
Sure. So the standard definition of anti-Semitism is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. That is a definition that was passed by IRA, by that body, back in 2016, but actually was the result of multilateral input from both state departments, foreign ministries, lawyers, and historians, all working to define what anti-Semitism is, especially in the wake of the Holocaust, in order to effectively address it. So it's based off of definitions that were already being used by many countries already in the early 2000s. But in 2016, IRA actually came together and passed this consensus definition, which is now used by over 40 countries, well over 1,000 municipalities, universities, and sports leagues. So what is in the IHRA working definition? First, a general definition of what anti-Semitism is, which can be defined as hatred or hostility for Jews or even non-Jews, and the perception of them being Jewish or affiliated with Jews or Jewish themselves that can be leveraged against their property, their person, or an institution. So that just basically is a very legalistic way of saying open hostility, hatred, or aggression towards Jewish institutions, towards Jewish people, and certainly in terms of personal security. But then what's really amazing about the IRA working definition, which really informs our work here at CyberWell, is that it goes into 11 concrete examples of the different forms that anti-Semitism can take. And when we look at anti-Semitism in the larger landscape of hate speech, right, and specific discrimination and hatred targeted at other groups, one of the things that's very unique and nuanced and complex about anti-Semitism is that it has changed over time, depending on the historical moment of the time, right? So I'll give you a real life example. One of the things that are rooted in the IHRA working definition is the recognition that Holocaust denial or distortion is a form of anti-Semitism. That's actually coming to talk about why denialism is a form of Jew hatred by effectively also saying that that event of the Holocaust, the genocide of Jewish people, didn't happen, but also the conspiracy theories that come in around that, right? For example, that the Jews were part of perpetuating the Holocaust, or they did it on purpose in order to get the Israeli state. So there's an entire academic work around Holocaust denial and distortion, or what we call Holocaust hate speech. What we've seen since October 7th is actually that this same exact model of denialism is now being absolutely platformed and leveraged against denying atrocities like the October 7th attacks themselves. And since that got such a lot of mainstream normalization because of engagement algorithms on social media, we're seeing that denialism actually is a form of anti-Semitism today, to not only deny when anti-Semitic events happen, but actually put the blame on Jews themselves when anti-Semitism and violence is leveraged against them.
So social media is, there's some good to it, and we also all know that social media has been the source of perpetuating a lot of myths, and it's affecting election results around the world. Its effects are still, we're trying to understand what their effects are, but they are widespread and they're influencing people's behavior and so on. So broadly speaking, what is it that you see when you're looking at anti-Semitism online?
So when we look at anti-Semitism online, and specifically anti-Semitism or Jew hatred in a mainstream social media context, right? So the largest platforms in the world, Meta, that has roughly 3 to 4 billion monthly average users, X has about 650 million, TikTok has maybe 1 billion monthly average users, and then YouTube, which is also close to the 3 billion range. So we're talking about the major platforms, and I think that that's an important thing as well to discuss. Why is CyberWell dedicated to taking on this issue of compliance against online anti-Semitic content? Is because these platforms have the largest audiences in the world, right? It's not just these specific forums that are hate platforms and where extremists can organize. We're talking about actually normalizing this type of hatred, extremism, and hostility into mainstream culture. So how have we seen Jew hatred shift since CyberWell started in 2022, and since I personally have been researching anti-Semitism since about 2018? So one of the things I can tell you is that I've seen conspiracy theories become violence very recently over time. Specifically after October 7th, there was a very clear phenomenon during the October 7th attacks by Hamas here in Israel of recording physical harm, murder, execution, rape, etc., and putting that into high engagement algorithms. And that was really a turning point in terms of the security threat that the social media platforms now held. They became a tool in the hands of Hamas. The thing is that phenomenon of recording physical harm, humiliation, and violence against Jewish people, and then putting it into engagement algorithms, has since repeated. So today we're in a situation where there is some type of organization online, if it's a protest against Israel, if it's maybe a protest against buying property or a speaker, whatever it is, that would then deteriorate into an anti-Semitic event, right? Physical violence, harassment, humiliation, etc. And that recording is put into these high engagement algorithms, and there's a phenomenon of almost fetishizing physical harm and humiliation towards Jews in those engagement algorithms. It means it creates an echo chamber of voyeurism, and what that creates is ultimately upping the threshold of what's considered normal behavior and hostility against Jewish people. Now, it's not enough that this phenomenon is you're recording the hate and hostility and the violence against Jewish people, but now there's also a reaction against it, saying that's not anti-Semitic or that was a political event, and ultimately that denial narrative is then always used as a precursor for calls to more violence.
What are the crazy narratives that you see out there?
So it's everything from, I'll just give you a recent example. Now there's the horrible massacre happening against the Druze minority inside of southern Syria. And this is an important point to highlight that anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, specifically around a classic trope of the conspiracy theory that Jews are in some kind of cabal ruling the world or ruling specific governments. It can be leveraged against any government, from the United States government and kind of puppeteer, painting Trump as a puppet or an agent of Israel or a puppet of the Jews, to what we see now in southern Syria, naming Gilani, the leader of the Syrians, as Jewlani, meaning he's compromised, right? He is now a puppet of the Jews. So we see a lot of conspiracy theories for any kind of power that has, any kind of state power that has alliances or relations with Israel under anti-Semitic attack and under anti-Semitic characterization. But we also see very clear calls to violence against Jews. So that's something that that's a very real phenomenon today. After October 7th, we saw in CyberWell's tracking, because we track anti-Semitic content according to the iCherry working definition, that after the October 7th attacks, for the first time, there was an open level of calls to violence against Jews. And in fact, in its worst peak, that was about 60%, above 60% of the verified anti-Semitic content that we monitor in Arabic was open calls to violence against Jewish people. So that's really where the concern comes in here. We're moving away from conspiracy theories into open calls to violence at a very elevated rate.
So you mentioned Arabic, you do monitor in different languages. Can you walk us through the difference that you observe, the differences among the different online language outputs?
Sure, of course. So CyberWell, being based in Israel, really gives us the opportunity to monitor anti-Semitism in multiple languages. It's something that makes us very unique in this space. We also monitor in English and in the Arabic language. And one of the things that we've noticed very clearly is that the anti-Semitism in Arabic online acts differently than the anti-Semitism in English online. So whereas you have a lot of more conspiratorial language around anti-Semitism, specifically stereotypes about Jews controlling the media, controlling the government, what we call classic anti-Semitism in English, what narrative is really driving in Arabic anti-Semitism is actually characterizing Jews as the enemy. So much more in-group, out-group, dehumanization, and I would even say religious anti-Semitism. Another thing in the Arabic-speaking world that's very common is the use of the protocols of the Elders of Zion as a source of justifying why hostility against Jewish people is justified, because they're in a conspiracy to actually control the Muslim world. So there's a lot more religious text, religious influence, and also protocols of the Elders of Zion influence in Arabic versus in English. And the other thing that I'll say is the platforms, really before CyberWell started working with them, were lacking a lot of expertise in anti-Semitism in Arabic, which is another reason that it was important to us to do this monitoring work. We wanted to close the enforcement gap on anti-Semitism in English versus anti-Semitism in Arabic.
Protocols of the Elders of Zion, that's from what, the 1800s, long debunked? What's the theory behind that?
The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a fictitious text that was published in 1903 in the Russian Empire that painted a picture of a secret convening of Jewish people who were out to control or subjugate the world by promoting destructive ideas that would cause social deterioration, unrest, and also on purpose kind of embedding themselves into different governments and institutions in order to control the world. So an alternative agenda, a Jewish cabal of control. And I think that what's really important to understand about the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is that it was written in 1903, far before the Israeli state was established. And actually a lot of the political anti-Semitism, or the projection of classic anti-Semitism onto Israel, is very much rooted in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which, fun fact, was translated into Arabic and brought to the Middle East by the Soviet Union. So it's a very important point, because it's essentially taking a propaganda piece that definitely, by the way, also influenced Mein Kampf that Hitler wrote, 100%, bringing it into the Arabic language, bringing it here into the Middle East, and it's still one of the most widely quoted and used sources in Arabic content that spreads anti-Semitism. So it's very widely used, and recently CyberWell was looking at a new phenomenon of actually taking this model of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, making up some type of conspiracy theory, and that is now being used on social media in a new conspiracy theory called Tired Islam. Tired Islam makes up a book that was written in the US Library of Congress. This is completely false, of course, but is essentially a book where it outlines how the Jews are purposefully trying to, again, subjugate specifically Muslim societies, and by destroying Islam, by promoting feminism, by encouraging people to kind of be proud of themselves and maybe less focus on family values and not honor their parents. And it's really just the same exact model of protocols of the Elders of Zion, now Muslimified in order to create this fake conspiracy theory that Jews are trying to end Islam.
So is someone behind this?
So that's a complicated question, and it depends on the narrative that you're looking at online. So with online anti-Semitism, we have seen that shift as well. With October 7th denial specifically, which was a full-out campaign to deny the atrocities of October 7th, deny the fact that there was rape and sexual violence on October 7th, to falsely claim that Israel purposely orchestrated October 7th and that they did it on purpose in order to benefit from military aid. Like, this is exactly the same exact model as Holocaust denial, now projected onto October 7th denial. So in a separate report, CyberWell, which was the same company that was actually contracted by Elon Musk to get a read on how many fake accounts were out on Twitter before he purchased it, they found that the top 100 influencers that were promoting this October 7th denial narrative that CyberWell also mapped out were basically being amplified by anywhere between 20 to 40% fake accounts, right? So that's an indicator of inauthentic behavior, and that this is purposefully being amplified in order to get into the engagement algorithm. So that's on October 7th denial specifically. But in the recent war with Iran that we saw, and we tracked online anti-Semitism, we saw that actually this was a lot more organic, open celebration of the death of Israelis, of the targeting of civilian infrastructure. And that's very worrying, because that's exactly the tipping point that we're looking at here. And when we think of preventing tragedies and atrocities like the Holocaust, we want to avoid the tipping point where a society goes systemically hostile against Jews, okay? So if you're having this regular, what we talked about, voyeuristic phenomenon of looking at the physical harm of Jewish people, in addition to very specific misinformation and disinformation campaigns, denying atrocities, claiming that there's some type of conspiracy happening here, then eventually people start believing the bots. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now online.
Can you typically kind of plot the course that a story takes, like from post to how it gets retweeted or reposted and so on, and kind of where it might come from and then how it gets spread?
So it depends on what post you're looking at, but I can tell you specifically with October 7th denial, the first tweets that we tracked that were denying the events of October 7th and the scope of that atrocity were actually coming from Lebanon, with one account that had maybe 300 followers, and then all of a sudden got to 3 million views on one tweet that was October 7th denial. So that is indicative, again, of inauthentic behavior, of purposefully somebody has some level of accounts that are set up to engage in specific pieces of information, specific pieces of content, and then sweep those up into the engagement algorithm. Again, we have to understand that the social media platforms are built on algorithms that don't make these decisions like a human being. And if they see that something gets a lot of interest, they're going to put it into an algorithm that's likely going to get additional views, right? So that's exactly how these misinformation and disinformation campaigns can happen on social media. But another element, if we're not talking about inauthentic accounts, is very simply that social media algorithms reward emotion. including outrage, including anger, including disgust. So a lot of anti-Semitic content is very much falling into that category as well.
So you named a bunch of platforms, Meta, X, TikTok. Surely they have the mechanisms to prevent the spread of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the social media platforms were very challenged on October 7th because it was what I like to characterize as the most successful hijacking of major social media platforms by a terrorist group. I mean, they literally did not experience that scale of a terror group recording their massacres and dumping it into their engagement algorithms. It's not something that they experienced before. So they were really caught off guard, and they responded in a very reactionary way. But if we look at other forms of content, like copyright violation, like child pornography, right? The social media platforms are experts in removing that content. In fact, they can remove it within a matter of minutes. So I'm really driven by that fact, and I really believe that since the content that CyberWell is sharing with the social media platforms actually violates their own policies, that we can get to a point where the rate of removal of anti-Semitic content matches that of this other type of content. They definitely have the capabilities. It's more an issue of building the expertise inside of the platforms and deciding that they're going to take this on.
What is their reaction typically? I mean, you get in touch with them and do they push back or do they quickly respond and take it down?
So CyberWell is proud to be a trusted partner of all major social media platforms at this point, and it's really because we take an approach of learning the policies of the platforms themselves and working with the social media platforms in order to drive the enforcement and the improvement of those policies and even some of their features on the platform. And I think that what I'm always happy to tell people is that there are these trust and safety programs and there are resources that are dedicated to these issues. But the fact of the matter is it's a growing field. You know, technology has evolved essentially outside of the reach of the regulator, outside of the reach of any kind of policy or reform. Now with AI in the picture, there's not a lot of interest to regulate whatsoever. So we have to work within the resources and opportunities that are available to us. And CyberWell really is dedicated to essentially making the best out of that opportunity.
How has AI changed your work?
So AI has changed our work in the sense that we can already see that AI is being leveraged constantly by anti-Semites to make their arguments and their content more visceral, more visual, more audible, and more convincing than ever before. You can make high quality content that's deeply anti-Semitic in a way that you simply couldn't before. So that's definitely challenged us in terms of the virality rate, in terms of the type of content that's being shared. But I'm also confident that we're going to be able to crack the code on how you actually use AI for good in terms of tracking and analyzing this content at scale.
And how has the content changed since October 7th? You've referenced October 7th a number of times. How is it changing?
It's become much more violent. There are open calls to violence. During the first few weeks after October 7th, there was a viral trend calling for young Muslims to take up arms and actually come here to Israel and kill additional Jews. And those calls to violence have basically echoed ever since then. This is not only related to the conflict, this is also something that we saw recently in Washington, D.C. after the Capitol Jewish Museum attack, where 2 young Israeli diplomats were killed outside of an AJC event. What we saw was an open call for additional violence after that attack, specifically in the comments section. And then 2 weeks later, there was the Boulder attack that claimed the life of a Holocaust survivor in Boulder, Colorado. So we've seen that the calls to violence are just much more commonplace now than they ever were before. It's a level of dehumanization that didn't exist prior to October 7th, and it's very, very widespread. If we look at the major narratives that were popular online before October 7th, most of the content that CyberWell was seeing was very much rooted in the conspiracy theory that Jews control the world or control specific governments or specific media bodies. that has now shifted into specifically saying that Jews are the enemy and that Jews are evil. So from an anti-Semitism perspective, this is a tipping point because we've now gone into classic in-group, out-group, lots of hostility, lots of open calls to violence. And as we said, the concern is the threshold, because the Holocaust happened in a place where the threshold of what was tolerable in terms of anti-Semitism was too high. And even if you weren't an open anti-Semite, you were indifferent to the anti-Semitism that you saw around you. And unfortunately, that's very much what we're seeing online as well.
Can you just talk us through the role of Iran, Russia, and China in this phenomenon?
What we saw during the Iran and Israel war was very much a celebration when Israeli civilian targets were hit, when people's homes were destroyed. We also saw the use of AI tools in order to create songs celebrating the attacks by Iran into Israel. Specifically, there was a very viral video, Boom Boom Tel Aviv, that was created by a US-based anti-Semite, Lucas Gage, calling for additional destruction to civilian infrastructure and saying that the Jews are untrustworthy and everyone's had enough of you and that's why this is happening. The other thing that we saw that was very interesting from an Arabic versus Farsi perspective is for the first time, Khaybal Khaybal Ya Yehud, which is a very common chant to basically reference when Muhammad's army destroyed the Jews of Khaybal, which is a city in the Saudi Peninsula in the 5th century. It's typically used as a way to say, Khaybal Khaybal Ya Yehud, O Jews of Khaybal, remember Khaybal, we will come to you and kill you again. For the first time during the Iran-Israel war, actually Khaybal Khaybal Ya Sahyon, which is the Persian Farsi version of this slogan, exploded online. In fact, it increased over 3,000%, and it reached well over 2 million viewers. The level of engagement on that specific slogan on Twitter reached about 20% of its entire engagement from the year in 1 week during that specific week. And it was right after the speech of Khamenei, actually, that started to trend and become viral. So you can really see how the social media platforms are really being used as an amplifier of unrest and also true open calls to violence against civilians, against Jews during this conflict.
What can be done about this, and what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that technology is a code, and unlike Der Sturm, the Nazi syndicate, this is a system, and systems can be fixed. And we are just at the beginning of how we think about regulating our technology and dealing with issues like content, hate speech, and disinformation. And what CyberWell is leading is cracking the code on how it is that we want to be able to detect online anti-Semitism and remove it at scale.
So if people want to get involved, want to follow what you do, get more information, where do they turn?
So CyberWell really believes in transparency. All of the content that we verify as anti-Semitic is available to people at app.cyberwell.org. They can go in and see exactly what we mean when we're talking about online anti-Semitism. But for our narrative analysis, for our reports, for our regular research, that's available at our website at cyberwell.org under the reports section.
Tal-Or Cohen Montemayor, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.